Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. Tacitus, about 90 AD, says, "Many assert that the Jews are an Ethiopian race. For Romans to have taken them for Ethiopians is clear indication of their color, since the Ethiopians were definitely black to the Romans." Wyatt says, "An interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews. Especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. The Portuguese Jews were very dark," says Pritchard. The Duchess de Abrantes, wife of Napoleon's ambassador to Portugal, said that the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese could be seen in a single person. So dark were the Jews, especially of Portugal and southern Spain, that many whites thought all Jews were black or dark. Modern History or the Present State of All Nations by Thomas Salmon, 1745. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, being at Granada in the year 1492, commanded all Jews to depart the kingdom of Spain within the space of 4 months, but gave them leave to sell their effects or carry them with them. Whereupon it is said 17,000 families of that people, and according to others 800,000 souls, quitted that kingdom. Some transported themselves to Africa, others to Italy, but the bulk of them went to Portugal, where King John II permitted them to be received upon condition of their paying him 8 crowns of gold for every head, and there promising to depart his kingdom within a certain limited time, on the expiration whereof all remained behind were to be made slaves. But when this people came to the port towns of Portugal, in order to transport themselves, they found the king had prohibited all ships to take them on board. And notwithstanding their stay was occasioned by the king's own orders, he caused all their effects to be seized on the expiration of time prefixed, and sold their persons to his subjects for slaves. The history of Portugal, from the first age of the world to the late Great Revolution under King John IV in the year 1640. Written in Spanish by a Knight of the Order of Christ, translated and continued down to this present year, 1698, by Captain John Stevens. The Jews, who in great numbers lived in Castile, seeing themselves condemned to the flames by the erecting the Inquisition in that country, swarmed into Portugal. King John at first entertained them, but afterwards, being sensible of their wicked practices, for that pretending to be Christians, they ceased not to Judaize. He sent out his officers, who burnt some, chastised others, and filled all the prisons with them. This made many of them fly over into Africa, where they professed themselves openly Jews. Whereupon the king forbade any more passing over thither upon pain of death. In the year 1492, vast multitudes of Jews came out of Castile into Portugal, engaging to pay the king a certain number of ducats for each head, and only desiring to be permitted to pass through the kingdom. 8 months were allotted to them to stay, and certain ports assigned them to embark. The term expiring, many went over to the coast of Fez, where they were plundered and abused by the Arabs. Having been little better treated by the Portuguese, many returned to Castile, pretending they were converted, and many stayed in Portugal under the same color. The king, the following year, finding them obstinate in their wicked practices, made all that could be found slaves, and taking their children away, sent them to the island of St. Thomas to be there brought up Christians. The Critical Review or Annals of Literature by a Society of Gentlemen, 1783. King John II in 1492 expelled all Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these banished Jews, the Black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews in Luango, who are despised even by the very Negroes, are descended. Professor Springle divides the history of the Negro trade carried on by Christians into two principal periods. The first from 1443 to 1645, and the second from 1645 to the present times. The first period is the time of its increase, during which not only its founders, the Portuguese, but the English, the Dutch, and the French dealt in Negro slaves, though chiefly for the use and consumption of the Spaniards, the sugar and tobacco plantations in the Brazils. During the latter period, these four nations were obliged to share that trade with the Swedes, with the Danes, the Brandenburgers, the North Americans, and since 1778 with the Spaniards. Their trade, however, still increased, not only by the Swedes and Brandenburgers ceasing their navigations to the coast of Guinea, but from the annual demand of a supply of more than 100,000 Negro recruits for their own colonies. The author confines his relations of this first Negro trade to that carried on by the Portuguese and Spaniards.